Hey guys, I'm Jose and welcome to this new tutorial on the Plethora Library in processing. So I'm gonna continue where I left off, and if you just seen video number 2, you'll see that we had something like this and we were exporting this stuff into Rhino, right? These were agent trails um, that were done here, drop trail. So I'm gonna just get rid of that actually, and display trail. So I'm gonna remove all that stuff, and I'm gonna bring back display points. As we're not going to be exporting into Rhino, we can actually use points now, and so display tail points as well. So we're going to be doing these tails. So let's see the same thing now, but with the tails. And you see that we have this kind of swarming behavior, going up and then reaching a point and then swarming around that area, right? So what I'm going to show in this tutorial, it's a few features about um, connectivity. How do the library kind of handles something like connecting lines between agents, right? So if you go to the documentation of the library, right, we could start looking for um, something like draw lines in range, right? So this is the one we want to work with first. So I'm going to just grab that. Maybe just grab that. And let's say something like, so this is the part where we're kind of drawing things. So let's say Bob dot draw lines in range. And here we have to just specify in this parentheses a few things, right? So what is the elements that we have to specify? We need to specify the collection of agents, so an array list of agents. Then the distance, the minimum distance and the maximum distance, right? So we're going to say similar to flock that requires the array list. We're going to put many agents, comma, and we're going to say something like from 20 to 60. Right? So if there's an agent between 20 and 60 units, do a line to it, and then we're gonna do a color, something like 0, 255, 150, just something like that. We're also gonna specify the stroke weight, just in case, right? Let's see what we get here. And you see that at the beginning I get a lot of lines, right? But then as soon as I they start spreading, I start getting less. And it seems to be that 60 it's too big of a value, so I'm gonna just put something like 30, and let's see what we get out of that. And you see that we're definitely having less lines now, and maybe that color is a bit difficult to see, right? But when we're getting here, it's a series of lines. We could just do it red. Red has always a good contrast with. So you see that these red lines now, it's a series of lines that are connecting agents on range, right? So they're changing, and you've seen this kind of visualization before, right? And this is not a mesh, as much as you could read it as a mesh, but it's not really a mesh. It's just a series of individual lines um, that are based on the connectivity of, or basically every agent is evaluating every other agent and checking if they are in range of the values that you're specifying, right? So that creates this kind of um, network. So that's one way of just doing some lines between them. But there's some few other options in the library to actually do these lines, right? So let's look at some of those. So for instance, we could say draw lines between tails, right? Because my agents actually have tails. I could do not only the lines between each other, but also between the tails, right? So let's do Bob dot draw lines between tails, and the information required is the same, right? So I'm going to just put the same info, and I'm going to get rid of this one because this one would be redundant with the first one. So let's see what we get here. And now we have much more lines, and it's much slower because basically if the tail's in range, I'm going to just be doing a line between the agents, right? So maybe this is something that you're interested in. or maybe you're not, but like anyway, it's just something that you could do with the library. So we could also change um, the transparency of these lines, so in a way we get a kind of a something more subtle. You see these lines are going everywhere, but it's got to do with the trails, right? So you evaluate the trails, and if they are in range, you're creating these kind of lines between, right? So you can create really nice visualization with this as well. And it's very simple, it's very straightforward. You can just like call that function in a way, start getting this kind of series of lines as well. All this stuff works with what I mentioned in the previous tutorial, which is exporting into Rhino. So if you just turn off the points, as I said, that they kind of produce problems. But if you just want to export these lines, or you're interested in exporting these lines and working with them and just using them for some purpose, you can export them into Rhino or into any other software through the DXF exporter, right? So let's see a few other variations that we have of these connections. So that's lines in range and lines between tails, right? So let's see. We also have draw Beziers in range, right? And this one has a few more parameters because, in a way, when you're specifying a Bezier, you actually need to provide a bit more info, right? So Bob draw Beziers in range. So you also have to specify the array list, but you also need to specify the minimum distance, the maximum distance, and the scale of the first Bezier and the scale of the second Bezier. So we're gonna say 20 to 30, so the same that we had before, but this time we're gonna put 10, 10, which is this is the scale of um, of the Bezier. Basically, what this function will do is use the velocity of the agent as a control point for the Bezier curve, right? So if we see this idea now, you see that the agent is actually doing, based on its velocity, its movement, it's going to do a line and it's going to connect to the velocity of the other agent, right? And this is something that we used for the work in DRL for the robotics a few years ago. And we started doing some visualization with this kind of logic. But the scale of the Bezier that you're specifying here, right, 10 and 10, um, is basically how strong is that velocity influencing the handle of the Bezier, right? So if you do something like negative, minus 10 and minus 10, or maybe minus 20 and minus 20, so you just increase the, you'll see that you flip the Bezier now, and you're getting this kind of spiky condition, and then they start kind of swarming around, and then you see the handle of the Bezier. It's something that you can easily control with this parameter here, right? So you have these Beziers, and maybe that's kind of some more expressive network that you can get out of this. Um, and probably you can imagine that if you have lines in range and lines between trails, you have Beziers in range, you can have Beziers in between trails, right? So we could look at that one being the last one. So draw Beziers between trails, and I'm going to just copy that. So I'm going to say Bob dot draw Beziers, and this one will use exactly the same arguments. So I'm going to remove that. The only difference I'm going to do now is just going to remove the tail position and the points, just to look at the graphics of this kind of Beziers on their own, right? So these agents now we don't see the points of them, but we start seeing a Bezier connection between them, but also between their trails. Um, So you start to get this kind of spikes, but also with this kind of arrays of sequence of Beziers behind them, and then it starts scattering. Obviously, you could like keep it tight with smaller separation in the flock if you were interested in something like that. But you can create some nice fabric by just working with this some of these flocking ideas, and obviously like connecting them and working with the connections between points as opposed to the points trails, right? So lots of possibilities there as well. Obviously this one's a bit slower because we're kind of just we have so many agents and so many trails per agent. Um, Here it's something that if you can remember what we saw in the last tutorial, if you make the update tail every more frames, let's say 3, you can scatter a bit more the trails, right? So maybe you're interested in this trail, I mean this series of lines to be a bit more not so tight, but obviously kind of create a bit more of a spread. Um, so you'll see that now the update happens in a different way, so every 3 frames. So you can actually get these lines to be a bit more separated from each other. Maybe you want them really tight, or maybe you want them separated, but then you get this chance to do something like that. Um, so yeah, that's kind of working like that, and you can just look at different formations that you're getting. Um, so yeah, that's some of the kind of connectivity utilities that you have inside the library. That's it for now, and I'll see you guys soon.